I've got a question. When you mix the most explosive spine in the NRL, some of the most explosive edges in the NRL, and the best coach in the game, what do you get?
Parramatta Eels.
The Melbourne Storm. The mighty Melbourne Storm, a team that is poised for success this year if they can get everyone on the pitch. Some big losses, but very, very strong retention of Cameron Munster and just a really good roster all around. How are you feeling about the Storm this year, Biz?
Yeah, pretty bullish. I think they're just one of those teams that no matter who they lose, no matter who they gain, they just come in and perform. They're always up there. I don't see them being a premiership threat. I think they could. I don't have them at my 1 or 2 mark. But I think with their signings, they've brought in some youngish talent. We'll talk about the second rowers they've signed. But the question for me is they've actually lost a lot of experience with the Bromwich brothers, Felice Kafusi leaving the club. And last year, coming in at 5th, I believe, but that was off the back of a lot of injuries. Losing Pappenhausen and then just a consistent rotation of injuries through various parts of their team. A lot of reserve graders having to fill in. But I think, with Bellamy-led teams, you've got players just coming in. Josh King, for example, last year, coming, really out of nowhere, starting lock for most of the year. Put Brandon Smith on the bench, starting Josh King in favour of him, and played big minute role and very, very solid. These are the types of things you can expect from the Storm. But yeah, I mean, talking about Brandon Smith, like in terms of their transfer window, their plus minus in terms of gains and losses, how have you thought about it?
Brandon Smith is huge. He's huge. And everyone's sort of saying, Brandon Smith wasn't that much last year. Let's look at the year before. He was in that conversation for one of the best tackle-busting forwards in the game that year before. He was just a monster with the ball in hand, scored a bunch of tries. Last year, he wasn't that great. There was a bit going on off field. There was the signing and that kind of thing. But you look at the previous 3 or 4 years, and he's been an essential part of that team. So, no, he's a big loss. Bromwich brothers are a big loss. Felice is a big loss. I think Felice Kafusi, you replace him with the experience of Sims. But the guy I'm really excited about is Eli Katoa. And I don't know if a lot of people know Eli Katoa's story. Often, Isaiah Papali'i came out of the Warriors. No one knew about him, and then he turned it on in Parramatta. I think Katoa could be a similar story. He played union into his adult years and switched to league a couple of years before debuting for the Warriors. So people were saying he was raw, and he was raw because of that. He was learning the rules of the league. He was learning how to run lines like a league player, and he's just shown so much explosiveness in his time at the Warriors. You throw him in at the Storm, you run off Jarom Hughes, you run off Cam Munster. You got like a guy like Olam outside of him, for example, and Pappenhausen sweeping around the back, and he is going to get a lot of one-on-one matchups, and he's too good not to convert on them. So I think we might see some growing pains there, but I think he's an upgrade on every back rower they've had at the club by the end of the year. So we're not going to be saying that after a month or two, but at the end of the year, we're going to be saying, wow, that was a good move. That was a good move. They moved off some guys who are aging, and they brought in one of the most talented young players in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very much in the same boat. I watched Katoa come onto the scene. Had a very impressive debut. I think he played big minutes in his debut. 70 odd minutes. First up. I could be wrong, but he's raw, but he's very impressive. And I agree with you saying that out of all the back rows we've mentioned, even the ones leaving the club, I think he has the most raw talent. The question on everyone's lips is, does he fit into that Storm system in terms of, fitness, consistency, able to, step up? So I think he was a great signing for the Storm. I think he'll do really well there. You talked about Sims earlier. I think he's a different type of signing. He's more of a typical second rower who's been consistent. He's been good for a very long time. You're getting towards maybe the back end of his career. He's still got a long way to go. But it just feels like he's been around for a long time. He, was a young gun coming into the Cowboys team, and he didn't really perform that strongly at club level for the Dragons over the last couple of years. But I do remember that, the wild card pick for Origin when he was picked into the Origin team out of the blue, and he performed really strongly. So I think he's got a lot to give, and I think, my question is, who actually starts in the second row? Because they were playing Sofa Solomon in the second row last year for time and just running him at halves. Do you see straight away from day one a Katoa Sims combination, or?
I think that's essentially what they do, but in a bit of a different way. So Sims is Sims. He's very good. Him and Felice Kafusi, very similar in terms of talent levels, a bit different kind of players. But I think they're going to start Sofa Solomona on the edge, just take a bit of the sting out of the game, maybe the first 15, 20 minutes, and then bring Katoa on for the last 60. And I just think too, like you look at him and you go, all right, can Melbourne carry someone like that who's maybe not as disciplined and not as fit? The top teams have a back rower like that. The Cowboys have Jeremiah Nanai. The Eels had Papali and Sean Lane. Penrith had Kickow last year. You go through Kaloa Matangi for Souths, Crichton for the Roosters. The Storm didn't really have that guy last year, and maybe that's what they need to lift their attack to the next level, because the spine is the best in the comp. The spine is all, top level talent. I was going to say they'll all be picked for Australia, but Hughes plays for New Zealand. But they're all just top tier talent. And then if you just put enough guys around them who can convert on one-on-one opportunities, their attack's just going to be the best in the comp. Then it comes to the defense. So you mentioned a few of those middle signings. If a Sofa Solomon is covering the edge a bit, you get Welch back, but you lost Bromwich, you lost Brandon Smith. I think the middle could be a bit of a weakness. I think that could be where they come undone a bit if there are injuries, and that's where I've got the Storm not doing as well on the ladder as they do in the finals. I think they'll have a couple of losses due to injuries here and there, but in the finals they're going to clutch up and they'll be in the grand final for me.
Okay, that's a big call. Talking about their spine, I think obviously Grant, Munster, Hughes, been great for years. All still young, and Munster had a bit of a down season in 2021, but 2022 just came off the blocks. The question for me is Pappenhausen. Excellent player, has dominated when he's been on the field. Hasn't been on the field as much. Had a brutal injury last year. Those are the types of injuries, not just long-term physical recovery, but mental recovery. I mean, it's a collision injury. He's had some concussions over the last couple of years. So, is this going to weigh in on him? I think, when he plays, he's always excellent. He barely has a bad game when he's playing at number one. What are your expectations for Pap this year?
He plays a million miles an hour. There's no more fearless player in the game than Pappenhausen. The way he runs at the line and takes it on and bursts through a lot of the time in spite of his size.
Absolutely.
He can't give that away. He just can't play any other way if he wants to be a top tier fullback in the comp. So it can't weigh on him. I think he'd be aware of that too. He could potentially take a step back and be a bit less aggressive and be more of a support player and more of a sweeping player and that kind of thing. Their attack might survive that, but no, I think he just needs to get fit, and if that takes some time and they've got to bring some other guys in.
Well, Munster played at the back last year. You see that continuing, or?
No. I think they've retained Munster. I think they want to keep him in that sixth spot. And if this is going to be long term, they probably knew about it a few months ago, so they probably would have done the preparations for it. So only round one will tell us what they're going to do there. What do you see being the downfall of the Storm then if they're not going to make the grand final for you?
For me, I just think you talked about it a bit earlier, but I don't think they have that explosiveness off the bench. Cheese is gone. That's a big part of their bench gone. Naz probably been called on a starting role this year, and last year their bench really just junior players or reserve graders or just players who are solid. But they don't have that X factor coming off the bench. The team is full of Origin players, so you're going to lose some of these guys. And we've talked about like Pap and Harry Grant. They've had injuries before. They're not the most durable players for their age. And if that continues, I'm not really sure who steps in for them. I think it's going to be a long bruising year for the Storm, and I think they're just not as good as some of the other teams that you talked about in our other previews, that you've got the Roosters up there, the Cowboys up there. I think the Storm have Craig Bellamy and they've got a lot of experience. They're losing a lot of experience as well, but they still have a lot of experience. But I just can't see them being in the grand final.
Yeah, I mean, I've got them in fourth, so I don't think they're going to be consistently the best team in the comp this year. But I think that grand final appearance will be on the back of just clutching up at the right time. Because the Storm at their best, who beats them?
Yeah, well, I think there's if you rated every team at full strength at their best, I think the Storm, there's probably like a tier, like a tier one with 3 or 4 teams, and there's a bit of a tier break before you get to the next. Storm are definitely that tier one. So if they're at full strength and they've got the full team at the back end of the year, I would not question them being in the grand final one bit. They do it consistently. But for me, I just have questions over their durability and their depth coming out of the reserves. So that's my big question. I'm not questioning the talent or the squad they've got whatsoever. It's just purely that.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, it's hard to differentiate the top teams. I just love watching the Storm. Like, they are just so fun to watch. They're so creative. I know I'm not a Storm fan, but they are such a fun team to watch. No, just when they're racking up points, it's so good.
I still remember the first Magic round. I was in New Zealand, and Melbourne put 64 points on the Eels, and Pappenhausen scored like 2 tries in 10 minutes off the bench.
I'm more thinking like Storm versus Roosters.
No, yeah, they're definitely they're exciting to watch.
So good.
They're definitely a well-coached team and fun to watch. But be really interesting to see how they go this year. Quite a bit of fresh blood. And the one thing actually we didn't touch on, maybe we spend a quick minute on, is there's rumours coming out that Bellamy has indicated that this could be his last year. Quick couple of sentences on that. What do you think?
Storm have the most players locked up for 2024 out of every club in the comp. They've got some really good key players locked up for that year. I think Munster, Grant, and Pappenhausen are in that group as well. So they're planning for the future. If they've got those guys locked up and they get a new coach in, I have no idea who they get. I've heard a bit of talk about Riles being his replacement, but I'm not that far ahead on it.
No.
I think they'll stay good for a while. If they start sliding, it could become pretty catastrophic pretty quickly because they don't have that junior nursery that some of the other top teams have. And being in Melbourne, things can go wrong pretty quickly because the fans might turn on them and turn back to AFL, and you lose a couple of those key players after 2024, 2025, and it becomes a bit harder to recruit guys there. So it could be dangerous. How about you?
No, I share the same sentiment. I think I personally think it's unlikely. I think the only really way Bellamy retires this year is if they get the premiership.
Ooh.
And I think he might, he's won enough, he'll call it quits. But I think, other than that, I think he's got a lot. You're right. They've got contracted players. They've got a stable team. And, Bellamy runs that team as good as anyone. So I think he's still got a lot to give. And I think, at least a couple more years in him. But, yeah.
All right, well, that's our thoughts on the Storm. Storm v Para round 1. Make sure to like and subscribe here too if you want to see more footy content. And we'll be sure to review that first game because it's going to be an absolute ripper. See you there.